Arizona Territory. Spring of 1879, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the Dragoon Mountains when the doors of the Red Tail Saloon slammed shut behind her. Marigold Vance didn't flinch at the bang. She stood still in the center of the saloon, her hands clenched at her sides, her jaw tight. Her green dress, once neat from the morning's work, was now smeared with dust and sweat, and the braid down her back had half unraveled in the scuffle. She had not cried, not when they dragged her inside, not when they told her she was to work off a debt she never owed. "I told you," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "I do not owe that man a single dollar." Cooper Briggs, the saloon owner, leaned against the bar with his arms folded, chewing a toothpick. "Your father did, and he is gone. That means it falls to you." He shrugged like it was the simplest thing in the world. "My father died broke. He never owed you, he never even came here, and you know it." Briggs waved a hand. "Debt is debt, girl. He signed his name to it. That makes it yours." 2 days ago, she had been teaching reading to the children of Benson and stitching holes in the neighbors' shirts for coin. Now she was locked behind saloon doors, told she'd earn her freedom with her hands and her smile. She stared Briggs down. "You can keep your whiskey." "I will not serve your men," he grinned. "Then you will clean, cook, run trays, you will work until the debt is done." "And how much is that?" $800. Marigold's breath caught. "That's right. Best get used to the smell of whiskey, Miss Vance." She sat that night in the back storeroom, knees drawn up to her chest. She didn't cry then either. Instead, she thought quiet and hard about how she'd get out. But the door was locked each night, and Briggs had 2 men watching her at all times. She wasn't afraid of work, but being trapped with no choice, no end in sight, burned in her gut like fire. 3 days passed. Then 5. She washed floors, peeled potatoes, and slept in a cot behind the kitchen. She spoke to no one unless she had to. She refused to smile. The regulars called her the ghost girl. Briggs didn't care. She worked, and that was enough. Then came the cowboy. It was late afternoon, the saloon half full, air thick with cigar smoke and the clatter of poker chips. Marigold was sweeping behind the bar when the doors swung open and a man stepped in. Boots dusted from the trail, hat low over his eyes. He was tall, sun-browned, and broad-shouldered, with a rifle slung across his back, and the look of someone who had ridden a long way and was not in the mood for waiting. Marigold barely noticed him at first. Men came and went. They drank, they gambled, they shouted. But this one didn't walk to the bar or the card tables. He looked once around the room, then straight at her. Her hands froze on the broom handle. He took off his hat. His eyes were a deep, steady gray, like storm clouds caught in dusk. "Marigold," she stared, lips parting. "Yes." He stepped closer. "It is really you." His voice was quiet but firm. "Do you remember me?" She did not know what to say. She studied his face, and slowly something surfaced: a boy with a crooked smile and a stubborn heart. A boy she had once known in Colorado, long before her father dragged them from town to town. She had been 12. He had been 14. His name was Weston Dyer, she whispered. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You remember?" She blinked, stunned. "What are you doing here?" He looked past her at Briggs, who was watching from the bar, suddenly alert. "I heard a woman was locked in this saloon for debts she never owed. A woman named Marigold Vance." Briggs stepped forward. "She belongs to me until the debt's paid." Weston turned toward him. "How much?" Briggs's mouth curled. $800. Weston nodded once. Then, without a word, he pulled a leather pouch from his saddlebag and dropped it on the counter. The coins hit the wood with a heavy sound. "Count it." Briggs's eyes narrowed. "You serious?" "I do not play games." It took 10 minutes for Briggs to count it all. Weston stood silent the whole time, arms crossed, hat in hand, his eyes never leaving Briggs. Finally, Briggs gave a sharp nod. "She is free." Marigold's knees almost buckled. She gripped the edge of the bar, staring at Weston. "Why? Why would you do this?" He turned to her, his voice soft now. "Because you do not deserve to be locked in a place like this, and because I never forgot you." She swallowed hard, heart thudding. "You paid $800 for me." "I did not pay for you," he said gently. "I paid for your freedom." The saloon had gone quiet. Weston held out his hand. Marigold hesitated only a second, then reached for him. His fingers wrapped around hers, warm and solid, and something in her chest cracked open. They walked out together into the fading light of the desert evening. Outside, she turned to him, voice trembling. "I have nothing, no home, no money." "You have me," Weston said simply. She looked up at him, and for the first time in days her throat tightened with something other than fury. "You are not still that boy I knew," she said. "No," he said. "I am a man now, and I know what I want." She stood still, the wind tugging at her dress, her heart pounding. He watched her, steady and sure. "Come with me, Marigold. Let me take care of you for a while." She nodded once. He helped her onto his horse, swung up behind her, and they rode away from the saloon, west toward the hills, toward something new, toward something that felt like hope. They rode until the sky turned indigo and the stars blinked awake. The trail west of town curved through dry washes and stands of mesquite, the horses' hooves muffled in the dust. Marigold kept her hands clasped in front of her, the warmth of Weston's coat at her back, the rhythm of the ride steadying her breath. She did not speak. Neither did he. When they reached a low rise overlooking a shallow arroyo, Weston dismounted and helped her down. A canvas bedroll and a small fire ring marked the place where he'd made camp. The horse, a roan with a white blaze, nosed the ground for grass. "There's coffee," Weston said. "And jerky if you've a taste for it." She nodded, settling cross-legged near the stones. Her dress was stiff with grime. Her hands were raw from lye soap. But the night smelled of sage and dry earth, and no one was watching her with a ledger in hand. He poured coffee slowly, handed her the tin cup. She took it, her fingers brushing his. "You came a long way," she said after a moment. "I was in Prescott last week. Heard talk from a cattle driver about a woman being held in Benson. Said her name like it meant nothing. But I remembered." She looked at him, the firelight catching in the angles of his face. "Why?" Weston didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes on the flames. "You were the only one who didn't laugh when I stammered," he said at last. She blinked. "That was years ago," he glanced at her. "I remember things that matter." Marigold set the cup down. "I never thought I'd see you again." "Neither did I," Weston said. "But when I heard your name I left the next morning. It wasn't a question." There was a pause. The fire cracked. "Where will you go now?" he asked. "I don't know." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "I used to think I'd save enough to open a schoolhouse, just a one-room place, maybe up in Flagstaff or somewhere cooler, but now." She trailed off. "You still could." "I have no savings, no possessions. Just this dress and a pair of worn boots." Weston reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a folded bundle. "I got this in Tucson last month. Didn't know what I was buying it for, only that it felt right." She took the bundle and unwrapped it slowly. A calico skirt, pale blue with tiny white flowers, and a clean blouse with mother-of-pearl buttons. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar. "I can't take this," she whispered. "You already have." He didn't press her. She folded the clothes carefully and set them beside the bedroll. The silence between them was easy now, woven with the creak of leather and the coyote calls in the distance. When it grew colder, he stoked the fire. She lay on one side of the flames, he on the other, their bedrolls separate but close. The stars were sharp and clear above them. Weston, when my father died, I thought maybe things would get easier, but they didn't. I kept trying to be good, to be useful, and it still wasn't enough. It wasn't your fault, I know, but knowing doesn't soften it. He was quiet a long time. Then, I've been on my own since I was 16. Rode fence, broke horses, slept under more sky than roof, but I kept thinking about you even when I didn't mean to. She turned toward him, one arm tucked beneath her head. Why, you were kind and quiet. And you saw things without saying them. She smiled faintly. I used to wonder if I'd ever feel safe again. You do now, I think I might. The fire burned low. Neither of them moved. In the morning, the sun came up gold over the hills, and Weston was already boiling water for coffee. Marigold dressed in the clothes he'd given her. The blouse fit snug across her shoulders, the skirt brushing her ankles. He looked up when she stepped out of the shadows. You look like yourself again. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I feel like I remember who that is. They packed up camp in silence. When the horse was saddled, Weston lifted her up without a word and swung into the saddle behind her. As they rode, she leaned back slightly, just enough for her shoulder to rest against his chest. Where are we headed? She asked. There's a place near Bisbee, he said. Old ranch that needs hands. I've worked there before. Owner's fair. You could rest a while. Decide what comes next. Marigold tilted her head, the wind tugging her braid. And if I don't want to rest, then I'll help you build whatever comes next. She turned her face toward the horizon. The land stretched wide and open, the road ahead uncertain but no longer lonely. She reached for his hand where it rested at her waist. He didn't speak, just laced their fingers together. They rode on, the morning bright and full of breath. By the time they reached the ranch outside Bisbee, the wind had shifted. It carried the scent of mesquite ash and sun-warmed juniper. And the land rolled wider than Marigold could have imagined, with low ridgelines that softened the horizon, and a scattering of cattle penned in quiet pastures. The house was modest whitewashed wood with a sloped tin roof, and the barn needed mending in places. But there was a stillness to it, a kind of waiting, like it might take them in if they asked gently enough. Weston dismounted first and reached for her waist to help her down. She didn't hesitate. Her boots touched the ground and she straightened her back, dust streaking the hem of her skirt. You think they'll take me on? She asked, glancing toward the barn where a man was hauling feed sacks. You're no burden, Weston said, adjusting his hat against the glare. But you'll have to speak for yourself. Mr. Morrow doesn't hire soft hands. I'm not soft. No, he said. You're not. The rancher stepped out from the shade of the overhang, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was wiry, with a face like dried bark and eyes that missed little. Thought I heard your horse, he said, squinting at Weston. You come to settle or just passing through? I'm staying for a stretch. This is Marigold Vance. She's looking for honest work. Morrow looked her over without a word. Then he nodded toward the chicken coop. That door's been catching. Fix it before sundown and we'll talk. Marigold didn't ask questions. She rolled up her sleeves, found a hammer and scrap of leather hinge and set to it. Weston watched from a distance, not interfering. When the job was done, she stood up straight, wiped her brow and waited. Morrow grunted once. You can stay. Meals are at dawn and dusk. Don't be late. That night she ate at the long table beside 4 other ranch hands, all men who spoke little and looked at her like they weren't sure what to make of her presence. Weston sat 2 seats down, quiet but watchful. She didn't mind. There was a comfort in knowing someone else was near, even if he didn't say a word. After supper, she followed Weston outside to the fence line where the sky stretched open and the stars came on slow. Why'd you really bring me here? She asked, pulling her shawl tighter. I wanted you somewhere you could breathe, he said. I haven't had time to think since you pulled me out of that saloon. You don't owe me answers or gratitude. I know. But if you stay, he added, I'd like to build something with you, not just a roof or a routine. Something that lasts. She turned toward him, searching his face. You mean a life, he nodded. Only if you want it. I don't know what I want yet. I can wait. She looked down, her hand brushing the top rail of the fence. I think I'd like to learn what it feels like to choose something for myself. Weston didn't speak, but his hand found hers gently, like he was making no claim, just offering steadiness. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to run. In the days that followed, she proved herself capable. She cleaned tack, sorted grain, even helped midwife a calf in the early hours of morning while the others slept. Her fingers blistered and her shoulders burned, but she didn't complain. She earned the men's respect not through words but through sweat and consistency. One evening, after the last of the cattle had been penned, and the light was beginning to bend gold over the hills, Weston found her alone near the windbreak, mending a torn saddle strap. You always work this hard, he asked. I always had to. You don't here. I don't know how else to be. He sat beside her, not too close. What would you do if there was no one expecting anything from you? She hesitated, the needle paused mid-stitch. I'd grow tomatoes. And maybe write down stories, not for a paper, just for myself. Why tomatoes? They take patience and care, and they don't grow unless they trust the soil. He smiled, slow and sure. You ever had your own patch of earth? No. Would you take one if it was offered? She met his gaze. It was steady but not pressing. I might, she said softly. He reached out just enough to brush his thumb against the inside of her wrist. Then I'll wait for you to plant something. The wind stirred the dust at their feet. The sky above them deepened to rose and violet. And in that quiet space between labor and dusk, she leaned just slightly toward him, not for shelter, not for rescue, but something simpler. Like choosing a place to rest her shoulder, like starting to believe she might stay. The first rain came 2 weeks after Marigold began her days on the ranch. It wasn't much, just a slow, silver soaking that settled the dust and softened the hard crust of the land, but it changed the smell of things. The earth held a damp sweetness, and the cattle stood quiet beneath the overhangs, steam rising off their backs. She was in the shed oiling harness leather when Weston ducked through the doorway, his hat dripping. Storms passing east. Thought I'd see if you were still breathing. She didn't look up from the buckle she was tightening. Hard to breathe with all this quiet. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. You miss the noise. I miss knowing who I am when I'm not working. You're not just hands and hours. She set the strap aside and stood, brushing grit from her palms. Then what am I? He didn't move. You're the woman I rode 80 miles to find, the one who faced down Briggs without blinking. I didn't have a choice. You had one every day you didn't give in. She looked at him, her brow drawn. You talk like you know what it's like. I do. His voice was low. My uncle left me with a branding iron and a cot when I was 17. Said if I earned my keep, I could stay. I worked 3 summers before I realized I could leave. What did you do? Left. Marigold studied him for a long breath. You ever think of going back? He shook his head once. Not to him. She stepped past him into the wet light, her boots sinking slightly in the softened earth. I never stayed anywhere long, not even when I wanted to. He followed her out. So stay now. She turned to face him. I don't know how. You don't have to know yet. They stood under the wide gray sky, the rain tapering off in the distance. Smoke from the cookhouse drifted across the yard, curling around the eaves. That night, she sat with the ranch ledger, her fingers tracing the lines of supply orders and grain tallies. Morrow had left it on the table without comment, and she'd picked it up out of habit. Numbers came easy to her, steadier than people. Weston stepped in from the porch, shaking the damp from his coat. Didn't know you had a head for accounts. I used to help a shopkeeper in Gallup, before my father pulled us out mid-season. He crossed the room and pulled a chair beside her. You ever think about running a place of your own? She didn't answer for a moment. I used to think about a schoolroom. Now I think about a garden, maybe a cow, something small that grows with care. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You'd be good at it. You don't know that. I know you don't quit. The lantern light caught the curve of her cheek as she turned toward him. Why do you keep saying things like that? Because they're true. She looked down at her hands. I haven't known many people who said true things. I'm not most people. No, she said, her voice quiet. You're not. The next morning, she rose before the others and walked the pasture fence alone. The air was cool, the ground still damp, and birds flitted between the cottonwoods along the creek. Weston found her near the south gate, her hand resting on a fence post. I was thinking, she said without turning. If we stayed here a while longer, I could talk tomorrow about planting near the north edge. That flat stretch near the rocks. It catches morning sun. He came to stand beside her. You want to put something in the ground. I want to see what happens if I do. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth sack. Found these in town last week. Figured you'd want them when you were ready. She opened the bundle. Tomato seeds. She didn't say thank you. Instead, she closed the sack and slipped it into her pocket, her eyes on the horizon. I think I'll start tomorrow. I'll help dig. She nodded, and they walked back toward the house, the path between them worn a little smoother than the day before. By early summer, the soil near the northern edge of the property had taken to Marigold's care. The patch she'd carved from stone-laced earth now held tidy rows of young tomato vines, their green leaves trembling beneath the weight of heat. She worked before dawn most days, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face, her hands calloused and browned with sun and soil. The others left her to it. Morrow had never said more than what was necessary, but he'd begun saving her the soft ends of the water barrels, and that was as close to praise as anyone got from him. Weston had started repairing the barn roof in the afternoons. It was quiet work, and he liked it that way. He kept his tools in a crate near the fence and whistled while he worked, off-key but steady. When the sun fell behind the ridge, he'd climb down and find her sitting beneath the cottonwoods, her skirts dusted with earth, a small ledger open in her lap. One evening, as the sky turned a pale lavender, she closed the book and set it aside. I've been thinking. Weston glanced toward her, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. Dangerous habit. I want to buy a piece of land. He sat beside her, drawing one leg up. You planning to run a farm? No, she said. A life. He waited. There's a parcel south of here. Not much more than a shallow stream and a slope, but the soil's dark. I walked it last week when I went to the post. The man who owns it is heading back east and wants to sell. How much? $75. That's not nothing. I've got 32 saved. Morrow's promised me another 5 at the end of the season. I thought if I worked the rest off through the fall. I have the rest, Weston said. She turned toward him. That's not why I told you. I know. I want it in my name, no one else's. I want to put my feet on it and know it's mine. Then it will be. She searched his face, waiting to see if he'd ask for something in return, but he didn't. He only sat there, the evening light softening the lines around his eyes. I want you there, she said. Not because I need someone to build it, not because I owe you, but because I want to wake up beside you. He didn't answer with words. He reached for her hand and she let him take it. They bought the land in mid-July, signing the deed with ink that smudged in the heat. The notary looked between them, one brow raised at the sight of a woman claiming property, but he said nothing. Weston stayed quiet too, letting her speak for herself. When the papers were folded and sealed, they walked the border of the land together, boots crushing wild grasses, her fingers trailing along the fence posts. They built slow. Weston felled trees for the frame, and Marigold bartered sewing and account work in town for nails and shingles. The house rose in stages, bare rafters catching the wind, walls going up one board at a time. At night, they slept in a canvas tent beside the stream. She cooked over a low fire, and he lit the lantern while she read aloud from the one book she'd kept since girlhood, a weathered collection of letters by a frontier schoolmistress. One morning, as the roof beams were being set, Weston climbed down and walked to where she stood by the doorframe, her hands dusted with flour from kneading bread. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's a dangerous habit," she replied, a smile tugging at her mouth. "I want to marry you." She didn't laugh. She looked at him long and clear. "You sure?" "I've never been more," she nodded once. "Then I want that too." They were married beneath the cottonwoods with Morrow and one of the ranch hands standing as witnesses. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself, sage green with a high neck and lace cuffs, and Weston wore his cleanest shirt, collar stiff with starch. They said their vows without flourish, but when he kissed her, she wrapped her arms tight around his neck, and the world felt still. They moved into the house a week later. It was simple. One room, a stone hearth, a handmade pine table. The bed was narrow, but they didn't mind. The tomato vines bore fruit in August, heavy and red, and she canned them in batches, her hands steady with the rhythm of it. In the evenings, they sat on the porch Weston had built, watching the sun fall behind the ridge. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. She'd rest her head on his shoulder and he'd wrap an arm around her, holding her like he'd never known a steadier place. By late autumn, she'd started teaching reading to the children from nearby ranches on Saturdays. They came dusty and grinning, and she sat them under the tree with slates and chalk, a line of books growing slowly on the shelf Weston had carved. One night, as the wind bent golden grass outside and the fire crackled low, she leaned her head against Weston's chest. "I thought I'd never be safe again," she said. "You are now." She looked up at him. "I don't think I ever thanked you." "You don't have to." "I want to." He kissed her forehead. "Then stay beside me, grow old here, that's all I'll ever ask." And she did. They built their life one quiet day at a time, never rushed, never borrowed. Just two people who found each other in the dust and chose to stay. A house with a garden, a warm fire, shared work, and love that grew slow and deep. Not flashy, not loud, but certain, and it lasted.